My name is Leslie Mathews Greiner, and as Daria mentioned, I'm an associate scientist and director at the MIT Harvard Institute of Research called the Broad Institute. What I want to talk to you today is some unspoken truths about what I do in drug discovery, and specifically some concept of mental illness during COVID. The title of my talk is From Robots to Recovery, the unspoken truth of a drug hunter who suffers with mental illness. I want to thank the organizers for the opportunity to have the chance to speak today, especially Shreya and Suresha. It's been an honor working with them and trying to get to know them, and I'm so excited to present today. A little nervous. We still get nervous as associate directors. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my journey. I grew up in Leominster, Massachusetts. I went to a public high school, Leominster High School. There I was lucky to be an exceptional student, and I studied biology. And I knew that I wanted to go on and continue my biology career. From there, I actually went to Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts, and there I got the research bug, as they call it. I actually was involved in one of my first research science retreats at the age of 18, where I studied the concept of immunosuppressive drugs and how we could help people who had liver disease when they were getting a liver transplant, not see rejection from that transplant. From there, I decided to go on and get my PhD in molecular and cellular biology. I worked at the Pioneer Valley Life Sciences Institute, which is part of the hospital at Bay State Medical Center. It's associated with UMass Amherst. After working at PVLSI, as it's called, I continued my training at the National Cancer Institute in Bethesda, Maryland, where I did what's called a postdoctoral research fellowship, which essentially is like your training if you're a medical doctor, your fellowship training. This is your research training if you're a PhD scientist like myself. I took a job at the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences, which bridges the gap between science and medicine at the bedside. And there, I'll show you a couple videos from what I learned there, but there I really learned and got the bug for translational research, which is what I do now as a drug hunter. I worked at a pharmaceutical company for a few years, Novartis, and that's actually where I met Suresha's mom, Kalyani. And there I helped make a drug called LXH254, which is a clinical candidate for melanoma, which is skin cancer. And finally, I took this opportunity at the Broad Institute about 2 years ago to be in a more academic setting, because frankly, I went to graduate school to be a professor, and I really wanted to work with students more. So when I give talks, I always want to talk about what's my why. Why do I do what I do? Why am I inspired to do what I do every day, and why do I wake up to do it? This book by Simon Sinek, Start With Why, is a book that talks about this concept of the golden circle. It's not just what we do or how we do it, but why we do it is the central concept. Everyone can know what or how, but few organizations or institutions talk about their why. My why was Bill Mathews, my dad. When I was in my second year of graduate school doing rotations, trying to figure out what I wanted to study, my dad actually came down with stage 4 esophageal cancer. He succumbed to the disease, but it really helped me solidify what I wanted to work on in my career, which was to pursue a career in cancer research. So that's my why. That's why I get up every day and do what I do. Now, what do I do, you might ask? So essentially what I do is I try to kill cancer cells. We culture them outside of the body. We culture them in petri dishes, like you've probably seen in the laboratory, where we put cells on the bottom of the dish, and then we put media and nutrients on top of it to keep them alive. What I do is I try to find drugs that will kill these cancer cells. And essentially how we find these medicines and test them, we call them anti-cancer reagents. But what's cool is instead of testing one drug at a time, now we can test hundreds of drugs at a time. We can test 384. This is a 384 well plate, it's called. So instead of testing one sample by one sample at a time, we can test 384 drugs at one time to see which drug works the best on a patient's cancer. Now it gets even cooler. It gets bigger. You might not be able to see this, but this is a 1536 well plate. This now means that we can test 1,536 drugs at one time. Now, these are very tiny, tiny holes. I can't pipette or add reagents to this. So what I'm going to show you is a little bit of the robotics that we use and the unspoken truth that I don't really use my hands anymore. I rely on the robots to do it. Now, what we also do is we work with dose responses. So just like aspirin, where you want to know how much to take, you don't want to take too much and you don't want to take not enough to have the effect. We do doses, and so we try to find the right dose for the patient to take, as to not have side effects, but have the medicine work. So I'm going to show a brief video, a little bit of what goes on at NCATS with the robotics. Just like you would see in an assembly line at, say, an auto manufacturer, we have these large robotic arms that move and transfer the plates around. And what it allows us to do, it allows us to screen millions and millions of compounds at a time in tandem. We have them hooked up where you can see they hold the plates, they move the plates around. They then will add reagents with this instrument called a pin tool. So instead of pipetting, this instrument can add 1,536 drugs at one time. And then essentially what we do is we look for the ability of the cells to die by light. So the more light that the cells have, the more alive they are, and the more dead, the less light. And we have imaging instruments called luminometers that actually read this for us. So this really has revolutionized the way that we do drug discovery and how we hunt for medicines in the lab. And I encourage you, if you're interested in science, you don't have to just be a biologist. You can be an electrical engineer, you can be an architect, you can be all different types of things in this field. So thank you. We'll move on to the next slide. Now, I want to bridge a little bit here with the fact that, yes, I've had a successful career, I work at MIT and Harvard, but there's another side of me. I struggle with mental illness. When I was first diagnosed with depression, I was in high school, just like a lot of you. And when I had my first child, I actually was diagnosed with postpartum depression as well. But there was hope for me. I had an amazing support system when I came out and discovered that this was going on with myself. What I did is I went to a recovery program at Women and Infants Hospital, which is in Providence, Rhode Island. It's an amazing organization that allows moms to bring their babies with them, and they have a nursery, and they have therapy all day, and help you recover from postpartum depression. There's also a picture of Eli. So Eli's 4 now. This is a picture of him when he was a little guy. But he's been my shining light and one of the other reasons why I get up every day and do what I do to help make medicines. So we all know that COVID has been really challenging, and especially on our youth. But the show, as for us, must go on. And so we geared up in the laboratory, we put on our masks, we put on our gowns, and we still worked in the lab day to day to day. Then the vaccine came, and it did have a huge effect on the population in the sense that we could start getting back to our normal daily lives, but without the toll that it actually took on us. So what I want to leave you with today is this unspoken truth of mental illness during COVID. If you look at some of the statistics of how COVID affected youth during the shutdowns, you'll actually see that it's pretty alarming that in the Journal of the American Medical Association of Pediatrics, it determined that during the pandemic, 1 in 4 youth globally experienced clinical elevated symptoms of depression. That's pretty high. While 1 in 5 youth actually experienced clinically elevated anxiety symptoms. That's where I'm trying to go with this. These estimates increased over time and are actually double that they were pre-pandemic. And there was actually an article on the news last night that was talking about upwards of 40% of students in Massachusetts that have been diagnosed or experienced mental illness during this time. So resources for mental illness, just like for me, the drug hunter, were available during the time that I needed them, and they're available to all of you during the time that you might need them. NAMI is an organization, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, that has a pretty big following in Massachusetts, so I encourage you to look that up if you're looking. Also, there's help for parents and moms and dads. There's an association called MCPAP for Moms that actually helps align people with mental health professionals so that you're not having to search for them on your own. And finally, there's actually another referral service called the William James College Interface Referral Service. I'm more than happy to talk to anybody about this after and my experiences and how I've overcome these symptoms of depression and still allow me to be the drug hunter that I am. So thank you for your attention, and I welcome any questions in the lobby after we're done, and on to the next speaker.